So for some reason, the left thinks it's a dunk to let illegals own guns in the United States of America. We'll get into that and why that doesn't make any sense. Also, we'll talk about a large-scale view of how the public should be viewing immigration from both a philosophical and practical perspective. And we'll get into some church teaching and some founding ideas on the topic. And then we'll wrap it up today with a discussion of boys in the boat. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Delenda Est. Oh, all right. Welcome back. It's a beautiful day. I'm once again back in the original studio, as you can see. Sorry about the time away from home, but so glad you guys are joining with us today. With that, Seb, take it away. Tell us about the Twitter memes about illegals with guns.
Thank you, Stephen. Good to see you back in the studio where you belong. Yeah. So this is an interesting one. Essentially, we have a. Well, let's get to kind of to the basics of what happened here. So essentially, the reason this is a news story is because a U.S. District Judge Sharon Johnson Coleman, who was an appointee of President Barack Obama, essentially ruled that a federal ban on illegal immigrants owning firearms in the United States would be unconstitutional. The ruling was from a case from an arrest made in 2020. So that's sort of the background, essentially. And the judge, Judge Coleman, ruled that basically the defendant had a constitutional right to bear arms under the Second Amendment because he had not been convicted of a felony or anything like that, although he was in the country illegally, obviously. So that's kind of the general case. And
Minor
something that
there.
Right, yeah. And something that I want to note here, which we'll get into, is some of the specific language that Judge Coleman used in the case. So I think what I'll do is I'll kind of go into the text a little bit, and then we'll look at some reactions from the more enlightened of us on Twitter. So what happened here is the judge here in the ruling rules that, quote, the plain text of the Constitution presumptively protects firearms possession by undocumented persons, end quote. So what I want to talk about there is the use of the word persons, right? It's not using the word citizens. It's persons, basically extending that right under the Second Amendment to people who are not citizens of the United States who are in the country illegally. And something that struck me from that, I have to say, was actually, the distinction in terms there. So I actually went and I looked at the Constitution, which I really like. I'm a big fan,
Nerd.
as you know, we all know, right? But something that actually really interested me is if you look at the Bill of Rights, right, which is the first 10 amendments there to the Constitution. What you see is that in Amendments 1, 2, and 4, we have this great language that's used, right? So Amendment 1, which is, everyone knows that we call it the free speech one, although primarily what it does is it prohibits Congress from making a law establishing a religion at a federal level. But something it does say is it says basically the Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, right? That's your freedom of religion clause. Or abridging the freedom of speech, there's the free speech, or of the press, it's another one here a lot, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances, right? So there you have the language people being used. Okay. So Amendment 2, as I'm sure many people on the right have memorized, right? We have a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, right? The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, okay? We all know that one. And again, you see of the people, right? Now go down to Amendment 4, which is the unreasonable search and seizure, which reads, quote, the right of the people, again, to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable search and seizure shall not be violated. Okay. So those are the three amendments there, and you see in each of them we have this language of the people, right? There's no
right.
We don't say citizens, we say people there, right? Now, if you go forward to Amendment 15, which was essentially the amendment that was passed to basically ensure the voting rights of blacks in the aftermath of the Civil War. So this one was ratified in 1870, right? And it reads as two sections, right? And Section 1 says the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, right? So previous condition of servitude obviously referring to slaves who then been freed and are now voting in elections, right? It's protecting their right to do that. And then Section 2 says Congress shall have the power to enforce this article, right? So something that's interesting there is in Amendment 15, you have citizens. In Amendments 1, 2, and 4, you have persons, right? And so I'm kind of doing some guesswork here when Judge Coleman, he talks about basically the language of the Constitution presumptively protects firearms possessions by undocumented persons, right? And to kind of steel man that a little bit, what you could say is, okay, the Constitution, when talking about these rights, says, okay, it's not specifying citizens; it just says people, right? And then you would say, right, it was not like we're saying that they should vote because in Amendment 15 you have specific language of citizens. So there's a distinction there, right? Some of these apply to citizens and some to persons, right?
Right.
And a difference that I just kind of want to draw out there, because I do think this is kind of a matter of jurisprudence and that kind of thing. And obviously you're more schooled in that than I am. I studied politics and theater undergrad, not law. But to kind of take a little bit of a stab at it, I think it's important to draw a distinction. One, you have the Bill of Rights, so those first amendments, right? Amendments 1, 2, and 4 are ratified in 1791, right? And then the 15th Amendment ratified in 1870, right, under different circumstances about 90 years later.
Right.
And it's Amendment 15 is doing a very specific thing for an obviously very specific time and group of people, right? So it's saying the rights of citizens, right? Which is now basically it's saying, okay, now they're citizens, you have to let them vote. Okay, that's it. Why? Because they're citizens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it basically just kind of nukes any sort of discriminatory language used by some antebellum Southern thinkers and things like that. I have to say, when I was reading, I'm like, why did they just say persons, right? I'm like, well, some philosophers down there didn't really think they were people, so that which, and you can read that in antebellum Southern philosophers, and not all of them, but some of them.
Yeah.
And
cornerstone.
So I think
speech
it's
dies hard.
Right, and so I think it's really just sort of cutting to the core of the issue there. But I do think that when our first amendments there ratified in 1791, talking about the persons of the United States, the people of the United States, I would interpret that to mean citizens, insofar as I think that's the language that was used at the time. If you look broadly at founding era documents and other writings of that time, it's really more or less what you see used there. So all that to say,
right.
There's kind of a distinction you could make.
And if I may interject right there,
yeah, go
quick,
for it.
I just you were making that distinction between persons or people and citizens, and I think that's a really interesting distinction. So I'm not sure if you mentioned this, but in case you didn't, I quickly pulled up the text of the 14th Amendment, because the 14th Amendment basically guarantees the Bill of Rights to citizens of all the states, right? That was kind of one of the purposes of the 14th Amendment, to extend those rights. And so I pulled up the text of the 14th Amendment. It says, "No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States." Did you already mention that? I can't remember.
I had not mentioned that one, so yeah, thank you for that.
Okay, yeah. So it's interesting because it's guaranteeing the same rights that you see in the Bill of Rights, but it uses the word citizens to describe that extension. So I think it's safe to say that by the time the 14th Amendment was passed or ratified, that's the language that was in use at the time, because it was trying to do the same thing as the Bill of Rights, except for to impose those obligations on the states. And here it's using the term citizens. So given that it was just trying to extend the Bill of Rights, it's probably safe to say that citizens in 90 years after the ratification of the Constitution meant people, as it was used at the time of the ratification of the Constitution.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. Yeah, so those are sort of the basics of that. But to get to the more intellectual side of that, which in my experience is always found on Twitter, as we all know, If you think you're an intellectual, okay, you just wait until you read the Twitter takes.
The
Okay,
messengers from above. The messengers from above here.
exactly. Yeah, that's as we all refer to them. So
Mm-hmm.
this meme here was, of course, posted on Twitter, as you can see. The one talking about we have the animations, we've got the MAGA hat, we've got the seal, we've got the brain exploding. As you can see, it's fantastic, right?
It's really a pretty deep work of intellectual discourse.
Yeah, no, really, Socrates could never. So to sort of to describe this esoteric masterpiece, you have the kind of the right wing figure saying our rights come from God, not the government. Okay, and then the other person, it's just kind of a stick figure, says, okay, arm the migrants, and the U.S. Great Seal is there for some reason. Oh, never mind, it's the district court emblem. Never mind, my bad.
Okay, that makes sense.
So it's a district court saying, okay, arm the migrants, and then just the right wing guy's brain explodes. He can't take it. He's been, as they say, owned, right? So that's one take. Another one that was posted, and this was by, I believe, the Libertarian Party of Louisiana, is this one here, right? Has a picture of a tricolored.
Did Tim Pool repost that?
Tim Pool did
Does that
repost
say
it.
Tim Pool?
It does, yeah. Tim Pool reposted this.
Oh my goodness.
That's how I saw it. Yeah, in case you were wondering
goodness.
where Tim Pool falls on the conservative spectrum. So Libertarian Party of Louisiana posts this, which says "Arm the Migrants" and a picture of a painted, looks kind of M4 style, AR style, maybe rifle, which is in 3 colors for some reason. I'm not sure why it is, but there you go. And under the rifles
like
is
the
the
Mexican
purpose.
Flag.
Yeah, that could be. Although it's kind of a brown more than a white. But anyway, I'm sure there's some meaning that I'm not smart enough to comprehend. And with the picture, they post, whether you're a citizen, legal resident, or undocumented migrant, you deserve the right to defend yourself and your loved ones. Rights are for everyone, period. Okay. Very intelligent take there by the Libertarian Party of Louisiana. So I saw that and I thought for a minute. I said, wow, we really need to start giving AR-15s to serial killers. I mean, it needs to happen, Now, what did I mean by that?
So true.
What I meant by that is, of course, not that people in the country illegally are serial killers. That's not at all what that means. What I'm saying is, if we're just giving firearms to everyone, regardless of what their condition or status is, then we shouldn't be discriminating against anyone, right? For example, what that's really to get to is, in this country, if you are convicted of a violent felony, you cannot own a firearm, right? I think an example, if you're severely mentally ill, right, you cannot own a firearm. And the reasons for that are very simple, being that it's not safe for the people around you, right? So I think what this basically gets to with regard to the Louisiana Libertarian Party's post is a very clever use of term, right? They say undocumented migrant,
right?
Which basically means, okay, the person came over, they migrated over the border, and they have not been documented by Border Patrol, by ICE, by whoever it is, right? Now, a necessary qualifier to that term, though, is that you're in the country legally, right? If you come over the border and you're not documented by no one, documents you on the way over, then you are in the country illegally, right? Which, as the name implies, is a crime. You're not allowed by law to do that. So there's that. There's a slight difference right there, right? If saying guns are for everyone, well, some people are here legally and some people are here illegally, right? Now, just to kind of state it broadly, you can be for or against that. You can say, I think we should just let everyone in, or you could say we should let nobody in, right? Okay. People can have opinions. The point is, there is a distinction, right? There's a legal distinction on the books between one party and the other party, right?
Right.
And that gets down, and that really applies to the first meme as well, and which really the problem with that one is it fails to make the distinction between a qualified right and that sort of thing, and basically saying, yeah, we should just give guns to everybody. And the obvious response to that is, well, not everybody, right? And so then it comes down to a matter of, okay, who gets them and who doesn't get them, which I believe you have some thoughts on. So Go for it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think really this comes down to the idea of a qualified right versus a God-given right. I think the idea here is that the God-given right that we're looking at here is the right to self-defense, right? You have a right to life, you have the right to self-defense. Um, but that does not mean that you can just hand out guns to absolutely everybody. As you said, felons can't own guns. Very mentally ill people can't own guns. Terrorists probably shouldn't have guns, right?
Probably.
It's like I said, it's more about the yeah, it's more about the right to defend yourself. Um, as the Second Amendment states, and as you brought up, probably only applies to citizens. If you haven't done something awful and you are a law-abiding citizen of the United States, then yes, you have the right to own a gun. But this is a qualified right. If you take the gun out and start shooting people, then you forfeited your right to own that gun. And really, I like to think about a lot of things in terms of first principles. So, what is the purpose of the state? And the purpose of the state is to promote the well-being of its citizens. Handing out guns, or at least allowing unrestricted access to guns to people flowing over the border, is a terrible idea. I mean, we've already heard stories in the news of illegal immigrants killing people, stabbing people. And now we think it's a good idea for the well-being of the citizens of the country to allow those kinds of people access to guns. This is ridiculous. It goes against the idea of the state. And that was the purpose of the Second Amendment, was to, well, I think it was there were a number of reasons. Obviously, the one that the leftists like to point out is the hunting. Well, it was just for hunting. Well, no. It was also for self-defense, personal self-defense. But I personally believe that it was as a bit of a check against the power of the federal government. But all of it is oriented toward the well-being of the citizens of the state. And if you throw that purpose out, then the purpose of the Second Amendment ceases to exist. I personally believe that the Second Amendment is predicated on a population that is somewhat functional. And I think this might be kind of an unpopular take now, but at least among the conservatives, I think that the more we're sliding into this utter social chaos, I do think that an unqualified right to own a gun could be an issue, because again, what is the purpose of the Second Amendment? It is to promote the welfare of the citizens of the state. If you are a law-abiding citizen and you're a normal person, absolutely you have the right to own a gun. But unfortunately, the number of people who are normal and law-abiding is dropping precipitously in this country. I mean, we have trouble figuring out what men and women are at this point.
Yeah,
all
no, I
of
think
this
it's
is
a
to
good point.
say, yeah, all of this is to say is that essentially the right to own a gun is a qualified right predicated on your ability to be a normal, upstanding citizen. Because if you are a normal, upstanding citizen, then you are very, very likely to use that right in furtherance of the well-being of yourself and those around you.
Yeah, I think it's good. I think it's an excellent point, and I think kind of another bit I wanted to add was that obviously when we're talking about people in the country illegally, we can make a distinction between, for example, the guy who came over illegally maybe 10 years ago and now lives in outside El Paso and works somewhere and lives in probably not a great neighborhood, if we're being honest, and because these people are very often paid very, very little, often below minimum wage, and and maybe thinks, I don't live in a great area, maybe I should have a gun to defend myself, right? I mean, that's kind of the reasonable approach you can make. There's obviously a distinction between that person and the violent criminal who's coming over here with MS-13, right? I mean, there's a distinction there, but even with the former case, I think there's the legal, case for prohibiting a firearm sale to that person is very strong, and the reason for that is what I would say is what this case was prosecuted under, right? So this person who was arrested in 2020, and then the case that was ruled, right? This person was prosecuted under 18 U.S. Code 922, right? Which basically talks about sales and owning of firearms for people who are not citizens and bringing guns into the country and that kind of thing. By the way, it's very, very hard for a non-resident to bring a gun into the United States. It's very difficult to do. Really, the only way you can do it is if you're doing it for hunting or you're competing in some kind of, say, an international, shooting sports competition is taking place in this country, right? But
That
to
is
do it,
if you're crossing legally. I mean, if you're just jumping
right,
the border,
if you're crossing
probably
legally, yeah.
not too difficult.
But say you're flying, from whatever, England into LaGuardia, right? And you have your competition rifle with you or something like that. The only way you can do that is you have to fill out a form with the ATF. And here on the right, we don't really like the ATF very much, but this is something that they do. By the way, is the administration, alcohol, firearms, and tobacco. Or alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, depending on how you want to arrange the acronym. But point being, they're the ones you have to fill out a form with that agency, which can take like 2 to 3 months to kind of get approval for and to get back. So it's a bureaucratic process to get in. Point being, it's very, very hard for a non-resident to bring a gun into this country, even if they're visiting legally, right? And there are reasons for that, right? We, as a country, we have an obligation to take our security seriously, and part of that is, making sure that people aren't bringing weapons into the country with ill intent, right? But something that happens in U.S. Code 18922 is it basically prohibits the sale of a firearm to someone who was a U.S. citizen but has renounced their U.S. citizenship, right? They say, if you were a U.S. citizen and you renounce your U.S. citizenship, you cannot be sold a firearm in this country, right?
Interesting.
And to me, that's okay. So what we're saying is basically, if you're not a citizen, even if you were a citizen at one point, we can't sell you a firearm. Which to me seems to imply that, okay, if you're not a citizen and never were a citizen, maybe you shouldn't be sold a firearm either, right? And if you weren't sold a firearm, well, how did you get the firearm, right? We have laws in this country governing we have many, many laws governing the sale of firearms, the gifting of firearms, the firearms passing from basically one person's possession to another. There's pages and pages, tomes and tomes, in my opinion, probably too much regulation on how that happens. But the point is, right now, in late March of 2024, there are many, many laws governing firearms in this country, governing who can have them, who can't have them. And it seems to break down: if you're a citizen, you can't have one. If you're not a citizen, you can't have one. Even if you are a citizen, there are many kinds of guns you can't own. There are many circumstances you can't bring guns in. There are many places you can't bring guns in. And whether we agree with those laws or not, the point is they're on the books, right? And to kind of close out this segment here, I want to make this point that, to get back to what you were saying about the well-being of a society, I think it's a little dangerous to basically have all of these laws on the books and then not enforce them, right?
Oh, absolutely.
As you are a fan of first principles, so I am a fan of Machiavelli, right? And also first principles, but also Machiavelli. And his discourse is Machiavelli, who's
the same difference, right?
Of course, yeah. Machiavelli makes what I think is a very profound point, where he basically says there's really nothing more harmful to the security of a republic than to make a law and not enforce it, right? And so what's happening right now is you're seeing a lot of people who jump through all these hoops to own and operate firearms, looking and saying, well, these, here are these examples, and they don't have to do it at all. Why should I do it, right? I'm a citizen. I pay my taxes. Whatever the case may be. And whether or not they're justified in doing that, again, these laws are on the books, whether we like them or not. You can see how it can be harmful to social cohesion for people to basically see laws being selectively enforced and then really kind of questioning the underlying authority for those laws, right? I think that's a very dangerous, direction to go as a nation and as a society. So I think it's important to enforce laws that are on the books, and enforce them across the board, right? And I think
Absolutely.
and again, this will kind of lead into what we're going to get to in our next section, which is kind of immigration more broadly. So we will talk about that in just a minute. Are you tired of being able to focus when you pray? Hollow is the #1 app for distracting you while you are communing with our Lord. With Hollow, you can have various distractions pumped directly into your ears via headphone while you pray, whether it's distracting baby noises in the background, annoying people clinking their rosary on the pew in front of them, or even old people whispering at something that's not quite a whisper about something you're not quite sure about but in the pew behind you. With Hollow, we have various distractions available so you can really learn to persevere through distraction. Alternatively, with our easy mode, you can have guided prayer through every single facet of prayer. And what we mean by that is quite simple. Instead of actually having to make interior effort on your part, you can have various external factors pushing you along the way, resulting in a lack of spiritual development. If this sounds good to you? Then go to hollow.com and use promo code DelendaEst. The Hollow app is owned and operated by Neocons of America Incorporated. Any products, licensing, or marketing materials associated with the Hollow brand are owned by NAI. The statements and positions of individuals on the Hollow app do not necessarily reflect the views and positions of NAI. See site for full legal details.
So I want to start this segment by referencing a story that popped up within the last week where the Supreme Court allowed Texas to enforce its new border/immigration bill. And I do realize that the Fifth Circuit issued a late night order a couple days ago kind of blocking Texas's enforcement of the bill. But I think regardless, the Supreme Court's allowing of Texas to enforce this bill is really interesting because I think it shows, it introduces, at least for me, two very pertinent issues. One is obviously the border, big issue. In my opinion, the biggest issue facing America today. And then also, I think this really shows that politics is an art and not a science. And this is a bit of a tangent, but I think it's very fundamental for issues, basically undergirding all political issues. This is a result. And for a long time, especially since the 80s, so-called conservatives have been focused so heavily on principles and playing by the rules. And, I call these people the principled kind of people, where the Mitt Romneys of the world, where, well, I'm Republican, but I'm one of the principled Republicans. I don't do the party politics thing. That's not how politics works. Politics is an art. Here we have a great example of Texas being a pain in the butt for the Supreme Court and winning. They have a result. I think this is extremely important because the left understands how this works. You've seen it especially in the mayhem in the House lately, where we theoretically have a majority in the House, the Republicans do, but we're screwing it up. We're screwing it up so badly that we look so stupid. And this is because we have no consensus about what politics is supposed to be. For the left, politics is we have an agenda and how do we get there? And everybody joins in. There is no dissent in the ranks, largely, unless you're talking about Israel, in the left.
Right.
And it's why they're winning.
And just to kind of, and I want to jump in just for 1 second with that, because there's this great allegory that was kind of taught to me, and which I think demonstrates this really well. Real quick, which is to say, there's this theory, right? And you'll hear some people on the kind of more, maybe not even libertarian, but more of, again, principled conservative right. Well, they basically say government power is a gun, right? And, you don't want to use the government gun because when someone else comes along, they could use the gun against you, right? And so the idea is to, divest power from government, that kind of thing, right? And I remember kind of buying into that back during my libertarian phase. We all had one, okay? Don't judge me. And, and then, as I kind of matured in my thinking, I thought about it. I was thinking about the gun analogy, and I was like, you want to pick up the gun? I said, okay, well, there's a gun. I said, well, the left has already picked up the gun, and they're currently using it to shoot my family. So I don't really buy into this anymore. I think it gets back to what you were saying, which is where conservatives kind of look at, I don't know if I want to pick up that gun. The left's like, ooh, gun, gimme, bang, right?
Yes.
Because they understand politics, and quite frankly, right now they're better at it than we are. So yeah, goes what
far
you're saying,
far better. I think the principled kind of capitalistic right, they may have had a point if it were 100 years ago, if this were Calvin Coolidge, but really American politics has not been the same since the creation of the administrative state, and I can go into this for a long time. We basically constitutionalized the state of the emergency during the Great Depression and gave the government a bunch of emergency powers that it never had to give up because our Constitution doesn't provide for that. Now, trying to downsize the government is really a fool's errand because you have to dismantle the administrative state. So there is government power, and it will be wielded by somebody. And if conservatives and Republicans are not willing to wield that power, then the left will, and they're good at it. And they don't have any qualms about doing it. And so I think this story is heartening because it shows a willingness to actually push on the border issue. I think just a month ago or so, Biden, this is one of Biden's biggest liabilities. I mean, this is a huge problem for Biden, but he was actually considering signing executive orders just to get him through the election on the border issue. And I think some people's reaction was like, "Oh, this is terrible. He's just doing this to get through the election, and he's still going to screw it up badly afterwards." I thought it was a win. I was like, "This is politics. This is how this works." Biden is feeling pressure from the people. He's thinking about actually responding to political pressure from American, more conservative-minded people, and thinking about signing executive orders to get the border under control. That's politics. That's a win. I don't care if it's a Republican or Democrat in office. If we can pressure them to even consider that, that is how politics works, and that's how democracy is supposed to work. So I thought it was a great thing. Now, ultimately, it appears that it didn't ever go through, but I think it's the principle that matters. So anyway, building off of that, the border. Why is it a problem? Why should we be concerned? Well, there's the legal aspect, which is the invasion clause under the Constitution, and Seb, correct me if I'm wrong, which basically states that the federal government has the duty to safeguard each of the several states from the threat of foreign invasion. Do I have that correctly?
Yeah, that's essentially the gist of it. Yeah.
Okay, so if you look at it from a social contract theory, this is arguably just kind of a breach of contract by the federal government if they refuse to even allow Texas to enforce its own border. So there's a real legal problem with that I would say totally justifies Texas enforcing its own border over and above the wishes and orders of the federal government from all three branches. I think it has that self-defense right to protect itself from foreign invasion, which I think the problem at the border arguably is. But I think on a more philosophical level, again, going back into first principles, what is the purpose of a state? It is to promote the well-being of its own citizens. And that's the well-being of its own citizens first, and then the well-being of citizens elsewhere, right? If it has a duty at all. But it definitely has the duty to promote the well-being of its own citizens. Having a wide open border is not immediately obvious. It's not immediately obvious that that's good for citizens. And I think here's why. I think there are a number of issues. There's the economic consideration that having millions of people who are willing to work for very little could undercut American wages and undercut the blue-collar worker market, labor market. So there are those kinds of considerations. But I think the United States was founded as a country, not as an explicitly Christian country, maybe, but it was founded as a country on Christian morals and on Christian tradition. It was a very Anglo-Christian sort of heritage. And a lot of our laws, I'm in law school, and a lot of our jurisprudence and the way we think about law and order comes from medieval England. And we still read cases from England even after the Revolutionary War happened. I've read cases from England from like 1821 that still matter in American jurisprudence because our cultures are so closely tied together. This is important because when a country is founded on a culture like that, it's probably a good idea to preserve that culture in order to preserve the workings of the country, right? This is not something that we can just throw away. I'm not saying that other cultures are worse. I'm not saying they're even problematic. Heck, maybe some of them could even be better. I would say, Catholic cultures in a lot of countries are arguably even a better culture. But what we have is an Anglo-Christian culture. And that's how this country was started. And that's the kind of people it was designed for. So at the very least, we can't just expect to either annihilate or completely swap out that Anglo-Christian culture and expect the Constitution to work still and the rights, and the privileges contained therein. If you try to do that, then what you're going to result in is chaos, which is what we're seeing now. We have no idea what it means to be an American. We have no idea what America stands for. I mean, you ask the conservatives, we're spreading freedom and democracy around the world, and we're hardworking. We saved the world twice in the 20th century. We're a bastion of morality. It's a great place. You ask the liberals what America stands for, and they'll give you one of two answers: racism, or the spreading of the rainbow flag all over the world. right? We have zero idea about what America is. The border is only making that problem worse. Not only are we culturally erasing our history, we're also just blurring our borders so that there's functionally no difference between the U.S. and Mexico. If when carried to its extreme, that's what you're going to see. You can't expect an Anglo-Christian government to continue functioning as it was intended if you allow this kind of demolition of culture to happen. I think that a state has every right to preserve its own culture. And again, I'm not saying that other cultures are worse. I'm not saying they're problematic. I'm saying probably maybe some of them are even better, but they're not ours. And our government and our Constitution was not formed with those cultures in mind. To think about this a different way. So a lot of people like to, if I were bigger, I'd probably, if this podcast were bigger, we'd probably get yelled and screamed at and weeping and gnashing of teeth because we're racist or whatever. I'm not saying this has to do anything with race. Rewind 700 years and you look at France and England in like the 1400s where they just couldn't stop fighting, right? They hated each other's guts. Didn't have anything to do with race at all. They were two different countries and two different cultures, and they hated each other's guts. Can you imagine if during a time of peace, the English just started mass migrating into France? How well do you think that would have gone over? Not at all. It would not happen. It would not have been tolerated. And that's because both countries had an interest in preserving their own cultures, right? It doesn't have anything to do with race. It doesn't have anything to do with the superiority of one culture or another, but it's two different countries, two different cultures, two different ways of life, two different governments, and the purpose of both of those governments is to promote the welfare and well-being of its own citizens and not the citizens of another country. So that's, I guess, the long and short of the immigration issue. And I think that if we blur our borders completely and just have a mass migration without bounds over our southern border, we are going to be in deep trouble. And I think this is why this is the fundamental, the most important political issue of our time, because if we do not have any conception of what it means to be an American, even at this point geographically, how in the world are we going to expect to be able to solve our fiscal and cultural problems, right? If we don't even have some kind of semblance of stability. So if I were president, the first thing I would attack, close down the border completely and stabilize the country, and then say, okay, now let's tackle our cultural and fiscal issues. Now let's take a look at entitlements. Now let's take a look at the transgender issue. Now let's take a look at marriage and the family. But you can't do that if you have no stability as a country at large. And that is what I'm going to say about that. Also, as kind of a coda to that, there is a duty, and I'm not denying this, there is a duty of a country to be charitable. As Christians, we were called to be charitable. I was talking with a good friend of mine about this a month back or so, and I thought he made a really good point. He's we are a fortunate nation. We're very prosperous. We're stable inside for the most part. It's mostly a society of law and order. It's mostly safe. There is a certain duty that we have as a leading nation of the world to take care of those less fortunate around us. However, as my friend pointed out, we can only do that if we have the ability to do so. If we erase our borders and let everyone come in, even granting that all of those people are legitimate asylum seekers, which they are not, we could very well die by a death by 1,000 cuts, right? We need to be charitable, but only to the extent that we can continue being charitable. It must be sustainable, right? That's part of charity. You can't totally just kill yourself, and then that deprives everyone else who might need that charity moving forward.
Yeah, I think it's a good coda, and I think broadly that's the way a lot of people feel in this country. They're looking and saying we're just kind of erasing everything that our country's sort of built upon. And I do want to kind of address that a little bit, in basically saying, in going off your the kind of what you ended with, which is saying that you can't help others unless you essentially help yourself first, right? I mean, this gets right back to what our Lord says, right? He says, love your neighbor as yourself, right? which
Right.
is, and what that means is you have to take care of yourself. You have to take care of your country if you want to have the ability to help others, right?
Hmm.
Um, and then that it goes back to, I think, the stability issue. I think having those kind of shared values, some kind of basic set of shared values. Not saying everyone has to adhere to whatever the Reformed Baptist tradition, okay, in order to be an
Right.
American.
Right.
That's nonsense, right? But saying that there comes a very basic set of shared values that we have to agree on if this thing is going to work. And I think the point that you made about and you could make the point that, okay, well, we don't like this sort of Anglo-Christian culture and we want to get rid of it. Okay, you can have that opinion. The point is, right now, as you point out, our legal framework in this country is designed around that. Okay, so
Hmm.
if you want to change that culture, you have to basically burn everything down. You got to burn everything
Right.
down and start over, basically. Not
Which is
just,
what
we're
the
going to change this
leftists are
amendment.
trying to do, right? They're not even
Right,
hiding
but I,
it.
but I, right, but I think even further than what they're doing. I mean, you'd have to go full on, like, we're going to stage a violent revolution. We're going to burn everything to the ground, and we're going to build up Panem from the ashes. Or we're going to go full Hunger Games on this thing. You know, is what you have to do, right? Because I think that's how our legal framework, and our constitutions, how they work. I remember actually I was talking to a priest, and he was saying, he said, yeah, kind of Europeans get nervous whenever Americans start trying to start, coming over to Rome and talking about canon law, because canon law, kind of in the church and the European tradition, it just the understanding of what kind of what law is and how it works and what it's for really kind
Hmm.
of differs. The American perspective of what law does, what it is, and how it works is different from, really honest, how kind of Aquinas would have viewed it, and how you know the kind of Italian and Vatican tradition kind of views law. Right, they're much more
Hmm.
of a law as teacher and as a guide. Right, whereas Americans think of law is the thing that smacks you on the head when you're bad. Right, that's kind of the
Yeah.
very kind of dumbed down. That's how we kind of think about law.
Right.
Um, and I wanted to use that to kind of segue for a minute into talking about sort of this cultural, thing. America was founded as a Protestant nation, right? As a Christian, yes, but a specifically Protestant nation, Maryland being the exception, right?
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of the people, and I think it's important for us to reflect on this as Catholics, because for a long time, not for a long time, but for some period of time, certainly America did not like Catholics very much.
Right.
I don't think they could vote in some states to start. I mean, they were very, which really gets down to when people say the First Amendment protects like every religion everywhere. The First Amendment didn't really even protect Catholicism for a long time. In
Right.
fact, I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said there was some founder, not one of our main founders, but some founding figures who basically were nervous about Canada because it was too much of a concentration of papists too close to the country. Like, those people are dangerous. We got to be careful about them. Those Catholics up there, you know. They really didn't like the whole Pope thing, right? They which maybe you can understand, being descended from people who came over on the Mayflower to get away from church authority and that kind of thing. But
Hmm.
all that to say, I mean, like, for example, my family was Catholic Italian immigrants, came over in the first decade of the 20th century, right, into a largely Protestant nation, and largely there was Italian immigrants faced a lot of discrimination. Irish immigrants, also
Hmm.
predominantly Catholic, faced large amounts of discrimination, right? And all that to say, basically, I'm not some person who's going to stand here and advocate for we need to, like, not let people immigrate and not let anything change at all in our country, right? I, for one, am very glad that in in part thanks to the large influx of Irish and Italian immigrants, our country is much more open to the Catholic faith than it was 200 years ago, right?
Right.
I think that's very true. I mean, we have a Catholic president, right? Come on, guys, what could be
I
better?
know. Yeah.
So
It's
Catholic, so Catholic. He's not even Catholic. So all that to say,
drinks Kool
certainly
Aid.
it is the case that things can, exactly, that things don't need to tap the sign. There it is. So not to say that some of our understandings can't change over time, right? But again, to reiterate the fact that we have this common set of shared principles and values which the Constitution is designed to operate over, right?
Hmm.
Um, and if we just kind of go willy nilly with that, it's not going to end well. Um,
Right.
and I think to kind of reflect on, to kind of tie this back in, as we always do, kind of the church issues briefly, and to reflect on what you brought up with the kind of having an obligation out of charity and that kind of thing, which is obviously true. We obviously, both at a personal level, at a community level, at a societal level, and at a federal level, I would say, have an obligation to help those less fortunate than us. I'm not one of these strict isolationists who basically says we should build a 20-foot wall with a moat with alligators around every border in the country and ignore everything that happens outside. Okay, like,
Right.
one, that's a really good way to like lose a lot of good international relations, which are important. Okay.
Yes.
I'm not
yes.
people.
Yeah.
I'm not someone who supports sending our men to fight in every war, every continent across the country all the time for no discernible reason. But I do think that there are certain world affairs which are important for us to take a part in, right?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I'm not
For
an
one reason or
isolationist.
another, right? I'm an isolationist in the sense that I think that the country, just by merit of the system under which our government operates, is obligated to prioritize the care of its own people first and foremost, right? Now, that doesn't exclude helping others, right? That's not to say, well, we have to take care of our own people, so we're going to ignore everything that happens outside. No, two things can be true at once, right? I think we can certainly offer a helping hand to others when they need it, right? We have this big thing in the statue, they call the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor, right? Which the immigrants would see when they, came over the ocean, and my ancestors were among them, right? However, those people also waited on Ellis Island for a long time. For
Legally.
example, the spelling of my last name was actually changed because the immigration officers didn't understand how an Italian I is pronounced. And so while they were waiting, they're like, what's it? Okay, let's write this down. All right, in you go. And I'm complaining about it. I think my last name's fine. But they had to wait on Ellis Island when they were processed through, and it was a long process. And then they had to get work, and they had to, climb the social ladder. A lot of them started out very poor, and they kind of worked their way up. And they worked very hard, and they were rewarded for it in this country, because this country is a country that rewards hard work. At least it should, and it did for a long time. We're kind of falling away from that a little bit, again, partly through these administrative state excesses, which we're not going to get into right now, or else we'd be here for 4 hours, probably more. But
Oh, golly. Yeah.
all that to say, I think as a moral people, and as kind of a country founded in the principles of Christian morality, one, yes, we have an obligation to vet our immigrants, to ensure that we kind of maintain this moral cohesion. But at the same time, we can also do a lot to help others. But again, in order to help them, we need to be able to do so, right? We can't send aid overseas. We can't do, hurricane relief to countries in the Caribbean. We can't do all of, we can't send, for example, one example, we sent a lot of firefighters to Australia when they were having big wildfire issues and help them out with that, right? It gets harder and harder to do things like that when we can't have a cohesive populace at home, and our rule of law starts to crumble at home, right? So
exactly,
when people say it's okay, we shouldn't worry about that, we need to help people, right? Well, in order, again, you have to understand, how secondary effects work and how trickle-down effects work. You have to understand that in order to do these things, we need to have a strong base at home, right? If you're an army and you're, fighting a war, right? You don't send all of your troops out and leave your base completely abandoned so that the enemy can come and sack it while you're not, right? You have to. It's a very crude, it's maybe a crude analogy, but you get the point. Whereas we can't keep, and right now we're operating at an unsustainable level. The amount of foreign aid that we give, the amount of troops we send overseas, the amount of money, right? The amount of, and without vetting these things, our debt is skyrocketing. And these things are tied together, right? Because as you said, politics is an art. It's not a science. You can't put things in different test tubes, right?
Right.
Politics is people, right? And people bleed over between policy issues, right? So to kind of wrap up that rather messy train of thought, all that to say, as Catholics, we should, one, be thankful that this country allowed our religion to grow and flourish, albeit with some resistance at first. And we should be kind of mindful of that and make sure we're not unjustly critical of people who are coming to this country seeking a better life. But I'd say in the same spirit, we should ensure that people are not coming over with ill intent, and that people are coming over with the intent to actually join and to prosper in this morally cohesive society. And in order to help others abroad, we need to ensure that we have a strong base here at home. So there you have it, folks. Politics 101, it's complicated. Are you tired of struggling with problems in the church? Do liberal excesses in the clergy and at the Vatican annoy you? Are you really tired of having to put any real effort into remaining faithful in times that can be challenging for the church? Boy, oh boy, do we have a philosophy for you. Sedevacantism, With sedevacantism, you can simply blame all problems on the modernists. You can rage on the internet with no consequences. After all, there's no rules or hierarchy to bend your will to. With sedevacantism, you can simply say a random thing, say it's the fault of the modernists, and you're good to go. No more pesky bishops, no more pesky Vatican, no more pesky anything except those other sedevacantists who might slightly disagree with you, but that's not important. What is important is the fact that you don't really have to put effort into Catholicism anymore. All you have to do is find a random chapel and become informed. How are you going to become informed? By going to newvatican.com. Newvatican.com is the #1 website for sedevacantist Catholics on the internet. On this website, you can find information and downloadable PDFs on how to argue like a true sedevacantist. For more information, go to www.newvatican.com and use promo code DelendaEst. NewVatican.com is owned and operated by Unemployed Traditionalists Incorporated. All products and publications available through New Vatican are property of UTI. The views and positions of authors published on New Vatican do not necessarily reflect the views and positions of UTI. See site for full legal details.
So today we'll be reviewing what I think is probably one of the better movies of the past 365 days. And I mean, I'm not going to beat around the bush. I thought it was a great movie. The Boys in the Boat was released on Christmas of last year. I would highly recommend everyone go see it. Seb, take it away with some of the trailer.
There are some moments in life you never forget. The depression hit everyone hard. No jobs, no food. We were broke.
Looks like you still owe a balance on this semester.
So what's that about, making some money?
You're the rowing team. You're on it, you get a part-time job included, cheap place to live.
8-man crew is the most difficult team sport in the world. The average human body is just not meant for such things. Most of you will not be chosen.
Beautiful speech, Coach.
You're announcing the team today. Are you going to make it?
We rode out of need.
Come on, boys!
The need to stay in school, the need to eat, to sleep.
We gotta keep these, right? As long as we stay on the team.
Washington Huskies coach is bringing an inexperienced vote to competition.
They said we couldn't compete with the richest schools in the nation.
The Washington vote has taken the lead. Washington has done it!
I got 9 seconds under the course record. Olympic year this year.
Olympic year? I didn't realize.
That bunch of kids rode like no one else that's ever come through here.
Okay, so you get the point. That's more or less what it looks like.
There you have it. So this is a movie directed by George Clooney, and for those of you who don't know, George Clooney, I believe, is kind of known as being one of those last figures of kind of old Hollywood. He's very much kind of in the Hollywood old tradition, if I understand correctly. But before we get started, I wanted to poke through some of the reviews, and I think this would kind of get our analysis off on the right foot. So on Rotten Tomatoes, The Boys in the Boat holds a 57% on the tomato meter, which is, of course, the aggregate critic rating. So the number of the percentage of critics that gave it a favorable score was 57%. That's pretty bad. I mean, that's kind of embarrassing. That's like in the league of the last Jason Bourne movie, which was dreadful. But the audience score is 97%. So you know this is going to be a good movie. When you have a critic score that's in the tank and an audience score that's great, you usually know that something's up, that the critics didn't like the politics and the American people were fine with it. So the critics' consensus is that The Boys in the Boat tells its inspirational true story with heart and solid craftsmanship, but director George Clooney's stolidly traditional approach prevents it from leaving much of an impact. You already know this is going to be great. A stolidly traditional approach, sign me up. The audience says The Boys in the Boat might be slow in spots, but the end result is still an inspiring, feel-good film that the whole family can enjoy. And then some individual reviews from the critics, more of those messengers from above. Nicholas Bell from Fish Jelly Films on YouTube. Indeed, a messenger from above.
Since
Quote,
when is that? Wait, can I just get a YouTube account, start reviewing movies, be like, I'm a critic, put me on Rotten Tomatoes? Like, how are they qualifying these people?
I mean, as long as your YouTube channel is named Fish Jelly.
We're in the
Nicholas
wrong line
Bell
of work,
says,
my friend.
Quote, an emotionally frugal sports drama so elemental it strides into a creative coma, George Clooney overdoses on old-fashioned aspirations. Old-fashioned, traditional, still loving it. This is going to be great. And then from the
I already liked it, Fish Jelly. You don't have to sell it to me.
Exactly. The Wikipedia page has some reviews. So Jordan Hoffman from the Messenger says, quote, "It's a bit old-fashioned is the primary takeaway most have from The Boys in the Boat. And what that really means is low stakes, relaxing and predictable, but also basically good." CNN, Brian Lowry, definitely he's like a seraphim in terms of a messenger from above from CNN. The quote, "The movie can't really escape the whirlpool-like drag of its earnest familiarity, paddling around in a middle lane that doesn't rival the most stirring practitioners of this well-worn genre." One of my favorite is The Guardian. Peter Bradshaw from The Guardian, always a good one for really, really stupid takes on movies, such as Sound of Freedom. 2 out of 5 stars. Quote, "Clooney is capable of putting much more on the scoreboard. This feels like an animatronic museum display." Okay. So, panned by critics, loved by audiences. What are we going to take away from this? Seb, take it away. What was your take on it?
Yeah, so first of all, some quick facts. The film's rated PG-13 for language and smoking. That's right. It's based in the 30s, so everyone's smoking like a chimney.
Gosh.
They don't want you to do that. It's bad. It stars Callum Turner as Joe Rance and Hadley Robinson as Joyce Simdars. So they're the lead, and I'll get into them later because they were phenomenal. It's obviously based on the true story of the U.S. rowing team winning gold at the 1936 Berlin Olympics. Okay, and basically what happens is the JV squad from the school ends up replacing the varsity squad, going to the Olympics, winning a gold medal. It's great. Okay, so there were some initial points that I have. I really liked the film. I had some issues with it, but I thought it was way better. It just felt like it had way more heart than, for example, the last film we reviewed, The Creator, which was just a fancy slideshow with nothing underneath. So the initial points that I really liked about it, the first thing I wrote in my notes, fedoras on point, okay?
So true.
What that means is the costuming was great, okay? They had the fedoras, you had the suits, you had everything. The costuming was fantastic. I remember watching, there's a scene where they have a pop party, basically. It's a dance, and I'm thinking, wow, everyone's dressed decently. This is crazy. You have guys showing up to sporting events in 3-piece suits. I mean,
Yes.
I mean, come on. That's great. Call me a tratty LARPer if you want, but I'm sorry. It just looked better back then, okay? People weren't walking around in their pajamas and gym clothes, okay? Just,
Or lack
cope.
of
All right.
clothes.
Exactly. Or they just, woke up and decided not to get dressed that morning. The music was phenomenal, I thought. In that it was very, very period. Now, anytime you have like a sports training montage, it's always some pop song that comes on, right? They don't do any of that. Even when, these kind of intense racing scenes with the drone shots over the boats, which is just phenomenal work. The camera with cinematography is great too. But it doesn't go into this kind of bass heavy pump up. It stays very period, and it really just immerses you. You really feel like you are in the 1930s for the duration of the film. Right, from just the lenses, the way the camera's used, everything. It just really puts you in the time. It's phenomenal. One of my favorite bits, my favorite little quote from the movie, which is really funny, is basically they're at that party because they just won their race and now they're all like really popular, right? So they're all getting all the girls. And one of the guys is sitting there and he's like super nervous. And the other guy's coming up, he's like, "Dude, like, what are you doing?" And he's like, "I don't know, man." And the one guy points to the dude over there. He's like, "You know what that guy's studying? Latin. Like, come on, man." Basically saying, look, dude, if the guy studying Latin can get a girl, then like surely which as someone who studies Latin, I'm like, wow, okay. I feel personally attacked, but that's fine. I think you majored in Latin, right? So
yeah, I did. I'm being a nerd.
I'm like, all right, don't appreciate that. But anyway, overall, it was fantastic. But before I kind of get into what I really liked about the film, some of my very favorite parts, I want to point out a few issues that I did have. One, there's kind of a fun little inconsistency. I don't know if it was actually an inconsistency, but I would like to think that maybe it is, because of the first race, this kind of regatta between them and Cal, this other college. They're at Washington College, is the college where the JV squad goes on and wins. the announcer says we have 100,000 fans here for this race. I'm like, wait, 100,000? That seems like a lot of people. You know, like for like most NFL stadiums don't hold 100,000 people. I don't know. I don't know though. Maybe there was. Maybe, I mean, if I think about it, there wasn't a lot to do, as much to do back then. So maybe it was 100,000. And if so, good for them. There are a few issues. So there was some kind of more obvious exposition in the dialogue, and some of the dialogue was clunky just a little bit. Like, for example, be like, oh, basically you have someone like, well, that's a problem. How are we going to fix this problem? Well, this is how we're going to fix this problem. It was kind of very kind of, little, you can tell. Nothing egregious, just a little clunky sometimes, which is fine. Now, Act 2 of the film, I have to say, was the worst by far. It's still solid, but like of the three kind of acts of the film, the second act I think was by far the worst. Mostly because that's kind of where you get most of the tension in the film, and I have to say my main problem with the film is that a lot of the tension does seem quite manufactured, in my opinion.
Okay.
On the kind of the personal level, and I'll get into that. Basically, there are two main points of tension. One, you have the main character, Joe, his dad, who basically left him when he was young, and he's back, and there's this tension kind of between that, and he talks with his dad again. He's like, yeah, I just kind of left, and I'm just kind of, here, and I'm not really, wasn't there for my son growing up, and that kind of thing. So there's kind of that tension there, and then there's some kind of inter-team kind of tension going on. And they had to have to sort that out. And those are kind of the two main points of tension in that second act of the film. And I have to say they both felt like kind of a little manufactured.
Yeah.
I remember I wrote in my notes kind of as we're closing the first act, I really wrote like, where's the hump? Like, where's the tension here? Like, obviously they're going to have to get over something, somehow before they get to the finale. So where is that going to come from?
Right.
So I didn't really see a way for it to come up organically. And I don't know, I haven't looked into the true story a lot, but I'm guessing that they basically said, okay, we kind of need to have some tension in here. So let's, have this and this happen. And it didn't feel very grounded. It didn't feel, you have this kind of squabble within the team. And I just remember like, this just seems very like fabricated and kind of made up. And
yeah.
And they have the tension with the dad. And I'm like, this still just kind of feels like it's not doing a whole lot for me. It's just like, okay, we needed some tension. So here's some tension.
Right.
I think that's kind of the best critique of the film would be that a lot of the tension isn't super great. I remember, and it is very kind of formulaic a lot of the time, especially in Act 2, falls very much into the kind of formulaic. I remember there's some tension, they're training for the race, and the one guy, the main character, is still like grumpy because there's this inter-team tension. And I remember they were in a montage. I remember writing in my notes, we can't resolve the tension yet, they're still in the montage, right? It's just like, it's just very like, very formulaic, pretty cliche.
Yeah.
Again, it doesn't ruin the movie or anything. It was just, a little, I would have liked something a little more organic for the tension. The one tension, the kind of the third act, is there one guy basically gets sick like right before the big race, the gold medal race. Not the gold medal, but he's sick kind of at the Olympics, and then gets leading up to the gold medal match. And that did feel, it's not as much as big of a kind of tension factor, but that did feel very kind of organic and very realistic, because that's very much the sort of thing that happens. Like, okay, well, your one of your rowers is sick. What's gonna
Well, and it actually did.
That's
happen
real hard
too.
to. Yeah, and that did happen. So I think it's probably, it felt very organic, felt very good. I'm like, all right, that's fantastic. My other main issue with the film is I thought the ending was kind of terrible. They kind of win gold, and it just basically cuts to the main character is like an old man talking to his son, like, that's right, we rode as one, and it was great. And I was like, I just felt very like kind of yanked you out of it, because the rest of the film was so immersive in the period, in the story, in the characters. You really felt like you were living this along with them, and then it just yanked you out really quick. You were like, whoa, I was not.
Yep.
I felt like kind of a sense of dissatisfaction, because you get the cuts. They're racing the Olympics, and you get these cuts back to his girlfriend back there, and we'll get into that. It's a great relationship. We'll get into that. You get the cuts to kind of his dad. It's actually really interesting. He like left you kind of there and says like, I don't really know. We don't really owe anything to each other. But then he's listening. You can tell he's like proud. He's very proud of his son for doing this. But you never really get any resolution for that. You don't get a scene with him and his girlfriend. You don't get a scene with him and his dad at the end after this one or anything like that. Which I get I get it. It might have been tricky to do. Yeah. But I would have liked to see a little resolution there, instead of just a sort of hard cut to, 50 years later, he's an old man and he's talking to them. Like, what does this have to do with anything? I just kind of, it left me not very satisfied at the end.
Right.
Again, doesn't ruin the film or anything. I just felt it could have been capped off better. So those are kind of my quick points, and then I want to get into kind of the relationship in the film with it, which I think is really good, and kind of the tone of the film, which is really good. So I think I'll talk about the relationship for a bit, and then you can kind of maybe you want to jump in on that, and then we'll talk about tone. Sweet, let's do that. So the kind of the relationship / romance in the film is really, really good. It's honestly, I'm trying to think, it might be one of the best I've seen on film lately. So you have the lead guy, Joe Rance. He's kind of this normie guy, and then he joins the rowing team because basically he wants a place that you saw in the trailer. They're like, if you join the rowing team, you get a place to sleep and a job.
Right.
And you're like, oh, that sounds good because they're in the Great Depression, right? Things aren't going great. Like, the guy lives in an old car at the beginning of the film.
Right.
So they say, okay. And then you have Joyce Simdars, I think, or Joyce is the gal. And they kind of, they're kind of in class. They're doing a little looking at the other person in class. And, the professor's like, are you guys paying attention? It's kind of very, very kind of formulaic. I do get some of the critiques that this film kind of falls into some classic, tropes and stuff, which honestly I'm fine with. I don't need every film to be experimental,
They're the tropes are the tropes for the reason, It's Hills dating.
Right, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Not really Hills dating, I have to say. They avoided the Hills dating trope. I would have been annoyed if that was the case. So basically the reason I like this relationship a lot is it's classy, it's well done, and it's very well acted. Right. I have to say, particularly the lead gal, Hadley Robinson. Yeah, and clean. I remember at one point when they're in the gal's room, I wrote, "Am I about to witness sin?" And then and I didn't, and I was so pleasantly surprised. But yeah, it's very well acted. So the lead gal in particular is a phenomenal actor. Again, as someone who studied stage performance and acting for a long time in college, I loved watching these people act and do their work. And it was really good because it was a lot of just nonverbal kind of facial acting that was just really, really good. Some beats from it that I really liked were, again, they kind of meet and they're talking in the library, and it immediately comes off as kind of very, very kind of forward a little bit almost. And I thought, oh no, there's going to be this annoying girl that I don't like that keeps, showing up and bothering me during the film.
Yeah.
And I was kind of annoyed. But then you have this great, these scenes kind of in the class where you can tell it's very evident without any dialogue that this gal is really into this guy and genuinely really likes this guy. Isn't just messing with him. Even before they're dating, you can tell she's kind of taken with this guy, and she conveys that really well just through working with the eyes, with the face. There's really, and as someone who's kind of studied these techniques, I'm like, that's really good work. That's very well done. So, for example, they go to tryouts for the team, the guys do, and they're rowing all day. I don't know if any of you guys know this, but rowing is exhausting.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's this kind of funny scene where they're walking into the classroom, they're really stiff, and they can barely move, right? And they're walking in, and she's sitting kind of in the row behind them. And you can see she's talking to some person, and she looks over, and it's like, what the? And you can tell it's not and there's genuine concern, immediately, for the dude, right? There's nothing disingenuous or making fun of. There's immediate, genuinely, I'm worried about this guy.
I didn't.
The whole time he sits down, and she's like, what happened? And you can tell by her expression, everything is genuine concern. And I'm like, that's really good. That's really, really good. And just instantly portrays this isn't some kind of flippant thing. She genuinely cares about this guy.
Okay.
You're like, whoa, that was phenomenal. Another thing with some of the great ones is basically there's several times when both of them, but her in particular, I think her acting was just a little bit kind of on a different one because again, the emotional acting in the female role kind of in relationships is just kind of, there's more of it going on just from an acting perspective. But there were a few times where you could tell she's just the guy would say something, she's just basically lost for words, doesn't have anything to say, just kind of and then there's a smile or something. You're like, it's very good because it's nonverbal. You don't need to have any kind of cutesy one-liners or anything. It's just showing genuine kind of feelings. And you're like, wow, it's really kind of not doing too much, not trying to do too much with it, and it was done very well. There's a great kind of line. They're in a library. They're studying in a library together. Oh, every college kid we know.
Okay, that's Hills dating.
And that is Hills dating, right? However, it didn't stay Hills dating for long because basically she's got a little bit forward at the beginning, right? And because basically she's like, do you you guys trying out for the team? He's like, yeah, I'm trying out for this team, right? And she basically says I forget what the line is. Basically do you want to take me for a boat ride once you make the team? Hey, do you want to go out with me? Basically, right? And the guy, you can tell the character is kind of more like shy, a little bit more reserved, right? And he basically he's like, sure, like I'll do that. And her reaction isn't any kind of cutesy thing. It's just like, she's like, sure, and like goes back to like reading his book basically. And you can tell she's just like totally like, stars in her eyes kind of thing.
Yeah,
after
Cloud
that, right?
Nine, yeah.
And it's conveyed without any like, Cloud Nine, as you were saying, like her entire world just got better. And it's conveyed that there's no like, whoa, or any of that. It's just very good acting work, basically. And I went, wow, that's impressive. It's very well done. There's another time they're like in the boat, they're rowing the boat. Okay. He's like, because I will take her for a boat ride in the middle of the night on a lake. And I remember writing, did you check that she could swim first? But I remember, and they're, and she's basically doing the whole like cutesy thing, basically, where she's like, well, you guys probably get famous, then you'll forget all about me, right? Like the implication being like, right, please say no. And he says something along the lines of, I don't think I could ever forget about you, right? And you're like, oh, very romantic, right? But then again, you just get the same like reaction, just like Cloud Nine, like totally. But again, it's not so much that we see that all the time in films. It's just the fact that it's so well portrayed, as it's just so like genuine and
it's subtle.
It's very hard. It's very hard to like, very subtle. It's very hard to talk about. You guys should just watch the film. But the acting work is just so good and just grounded and good. You can tell it's clearly actors who did their homework, who have excellent chemistry on screen together, who work together, like know what they're doing. It's a very, I would say what it is it's a mature acting approach. It's a very, like this, especially the gal, check her name again because I want to give her credit for this. Yeah, Hadley Robinson. I just remember thinking like that is a mature actor who knows her craft and knows what to do here. Very impressed by the entire thing. And again, the relationship was clean. It was good. It kind of made you like, cheer. It was very good. Yeah. So that was kind of that. I don't know if you want to jump in on your relationship points.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it was awesome because it was clean. It was, I think it was very much a delineation between, like the man's role and the women's role. It wasn't trying to it was trying to be kind of a very traditional relationship, which I really appreciated. And of course, you just never see that anywhere. It actually seemed to be, they both seem to genuinely care for the other person and not just be looking out for themselves. So very cool. I think on a larger scale, I think there were three things about the movie that I really appreciated. On a very surface level, or like on like a basic level, I just appreciated that it was clean. I mean, there was also almost nothing wrong with it at all, which was just really refreshing. And it showed a lot of old school Hollywood, restraint in storytelling. It was a very reasoned, measured approach to telling a story. And that was really refreshing, and got to give George Clooney credit for just telling a very well put together, well thought out story without it getting, crazy. I thought the morals of the story or the values of the story that were put forward were very good. It was all very much about hard work. It was very much about self-sacrifice, very much about teamwork, looking out for the other person, not being self-centered. There's this great scene in the movie where I think you brought this up, where the main character, Joe Rance, decides he's going to leave the boat and then realizes that it's not just about him, and it's not just about winning. It really is about being a guy with the other guys in the boat and supporting each other as a team. And it's kind of a cliched thing, but I don't know, Seb. These days we take what we can get, right? I mean, it is in fact.
Hey, bring on
thing.
The cliches. Honestly,
yeah, exactly.
I'm a big
I
cliche
want to see
guy.
more of them. Yeah. And that leads me into my third point, which is, and I'm going to shamelessly pirate from or graft off of Michael Knowles here, but he's very much about just
Don't we
being
all?
normal. Yeah. One of his things is just about being normal. And that was the one thing that struck me, after watching that movie. I was like, hey, that was just a normal movie. Everybody was normal. The story was normal. The values were normal. Everything was just like, oh, man, we can still do this? Guys, we can still do a movie like this. Can you believe it? It's just,
I know.
Everybody is normal.
Some would say it couldn't be done. Yeah.
I know. And that's why I love the stupid reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, like, this is too traditional. I'm like, yep. And there is absolutely no problem with that. just be normal, as Michael Knowles.
Well, and
would say.
obviously it was successful. I mean, the audience loved it. So not only was it good and traditional, it worked. People want that, which gives me hope. There's still an audience for that in this country. And I want to tie this off by doing a little thing we're going to call frame of the film.
Oh yeah.
There's one kind of frame in this film I want to show. There were some great. The best shots in the film were these kind of basically drone shots going over the races.
Yeah.
Which
That's
were
a whole nother
beautiful.
thing. Like the ability to tell an old school story using modern technology without the technology taking over the display, phenomenal.
Oh yeah, it was very good. But I think this frame, not only is it a gorgeous frame that really could be like a painting in my opinion, but it really shows kind of, I think, a lot of what we've been talking about just in one shot. And so that shot is this shot here, which is, and we'll throw it up for y'all, but here's the shot. And it's the main character Joyce writing at her desk, right? And and just look at this. I mean, this is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's a gorgeous shot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the lighting is perfect. The tone is perfect. It's just, it's great. And it's just really captivates, I think, everything the film is about. Because you look at this picture, what do you think? You think traditional, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's traditional. It's sort of serious. It's set. It's grounded, but it's not too moody, So this shot, not only is it a beautiful, beautiful frame, that just is a credit to the cinematographers, but it really, I think, says a lot about what the film is, right? It's traditional, it's serious in its approach, it's taking itself seriously, but it's telling us kind of this older story from the 30s, right? But it's doing it with technique, with good lighting, with good cinematography, with good shots, and it's doing a good job.
Right.
And I think at the end of the day, that's what we need to be doing in movies. Tell good stories and do a good job telling them, right? And it helps if you have some really good actors along the way. Okay, so that's our frame of the film,
Right.
and so, I think again, I could go on for a while about the acting in this film. I could go on for acting about a long time. Why? Because I'm a nerd. Okay, don't judge me. But yeah, I think just the tone of the film, I thought the lighting in the film was really good. The costumes were on point. I mean, everything, again, as you see in that picture, it just really ties together the era very well. And it does it using great technique, great acting, all around bang up job. I liked
Absolutely.
it. Steven, close us out. What are your final thoughts?
Go see it, everyone. I'm not sure if it's still in theaters. Probably not, but go watch it, stream it. Do whatever you can. Go give George Clooney some props for putting together a movie that makes sense. And, with that, we'll close out today's episode. Thanks so much for joining today, and we'll see you again in another episode of Delinda S.